Okay, welcome everybody. Hi Anna, hi Penelope. I think you are here there with us. Okay, great. So we're gonna start. Hi Anna, hi Penelope. We are very pleased to have with us Penelope Dean. She will be having a conversation with Anna Font. So thank you both for being here with us. And this conversation is part of Editorial Clinique, an ongoing cycle which organizes conversations to explore the relationship between the editorial lines of specialized media and their capacity to disseminate and problematize contemporary architectural culture. So aimed at recognizing and constructing editorial agendas and criteria as capacities to articulate, influence, and promote interesting disciplinary debates. The cycle proposes a diagnosis of the forces that mobilize them and the ways in which domains and territories of culture are disputed. Through the presentation of editorial statements and sometimes their associated articles, editors and essayists of architectural publications have a discussion with Anna Font that in her role as a coordinator of the Archivo de Arquitectura at the school. So once again, thank you both for being here, and I will pass it on to Anna. Anna is also professor at the school at different levels. So yeah.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you so much for the introduction to the cycle and for hosting this. And well, first and foremost, I would like to welcome you, Penelope, to the school. Although we are in this vacuum of Zoom, but I know many people have been also looking forward to today to this lecture. So also thank you everyone that's in the different places, kind of joining in this way. I want to do a brief introduction because I mean, of course, we all are familiar with Flat Out and we're familiar with Penelope, but I think it's always nice to put it together, and it made me think different things while I was thinking of this. But while Penelope is a scholar, she's currently associate professor at UIC of architecture at UIC, and she studies contemporary architectural culture. And she's particularly interested in on the exchanges between architecture and what she calls the allied design fields, meaning interior, industrial, graphic, environmental, and strategic design, and these all in their respective contexts, again, like academia, government, media, or enterprise. And I think we will see this interest reflected somehow in the way Flat Out integrates contents in a non-topic based manner. Instead, I think it generates a medium where looking at architecture spectrum is a sharp intellectual practice of establishing relations. And I think, well, that this can be appreciated starting from the magazine's graphic design, which I'm sure we will speak about, to its name, Flat Out, as the Midwestern vastness, but also as a manner of speaking directly. So I think these things are all intertwined. And while her writings are along these lines, writings that cut across architectural history, theory, and criticism, combining a formal analysis of buildings, drawings, photographs, renderings, exhibitions, also objects, always with an interest on the disciplinary genealogy that embeds these different formats. And again, I can't help but to see in this tendency that to work across registers and formats, a sort of persona of personas. I don't know, maybe she doesn't fully agree with this hypothesis now, but we will discuss, like a sort of multiple architectural Asian that I might argue is at the core of Flat Out's fictional characters. But just to kind of end this contextualization of Penelope's work, before she founded Flat Out in 2016, she was also guest editor for Hunch, society editor for Content, and editorial consultant for KM3 and Crypt Sheets. She has written for leading international journals. I'm not going to name all of them, but she has participated in different volumes. And well, she's a reference to many of us that pursue architecture as cultural practice. Of all her activities, today we will know more about Flat Out, which is an independent magazine based in Chicago, initially supported by the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies, and that currently has 4 printed issues, and I think the 5th it's on its editorial process. So yeah, we're very eager to hear more about Flat Out tonight, and I don't know, to me it's a very magnetic editorial project, I think for many reasons. Maybe one is this sense of time and contemporaneity that it has. But for now, I don't know, I just opened 2 or 3 threads, but I'm sure there will be many more. I stop here. I welcome you again, Penelope, and I open the floor to you. Are you ready?
Okay, thank you so much for the generous introduction, and Anna, and thank you, Manuel, also for reaching out with the invitation. It's a pleasure to be able to present Flat Out to everybody today, and also to receive your questions about it. I'm going to share my screen now. I will keep talking in a moment. Is that appearing?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so I've already had a preliminary discussion with Manuel and Anna and have learned some new things about what we're doing, which is always exciting. So I can't wait for the discussion afterwards. So this is the first issue of Flat Out. It came out in 2016, as Anna mentioned. It was a magazine that I founded in Chicago in 2016. It's produced by a group of editors based in Chicago: Zara Ahmed, Ellen Grimes, Jane Kelly, Bob Sommel, Lauren Van Dam, and then the magazine is designed by James Goggin of Practice. In this particular issue, you're looking at the cover, obviously designed by James, but also illustrations commissioned by a Chicago-based artist, Cody Hudson. And one of the things that we do in the magazine is commission different illustrators to represent the fictional characters which form the concept of the magazine. So that's where I wanted to start, explaining the sort of editorial agenda of the project. Then I'm going to situate that agenda in relationship to the topic of authorship today, and disclose some of the inspirations for this idea. I'll go through how the magazine's designed and the role that the design plays in structuring the conversations. And then I want to end by talking a little bit about criticism, what we're trying to do in relationship to design criticism in the magazine, and what I think its role is today in architectural culture. So the organizing strategy of the magazine is based on 15 fictitious characters that we invented at the beginning when we were thinking about the magazine. What you're looking at here is the casting call, which occurs at the back of the magazine, which describes who these characters are and what their role is in the magazine. They range from professional types. So for example, a mortician or a political economist or an inventor. They're characters you can imagine as, professionals. They exist in the world, however, we've invented them. And then the other kinds of personas that you see here are actually character traits. So they relate more maybe to an attitude towards writing or thinking about certain topics, like an opinionator, for example, or a muckraker, or a scorekeeper, a challenger. So that there are 2 kinds, and we sort of, when we were thinking about this, we were thinking, should we make them all identifiable professionals, or should we make them sort of dispositions? We couldn't decide, so we just did both. Now, when one reads this, or if one wanted to submit to our magazine, we would ask that you audition based on one of the, for one of these roles. Each one was conceived to do a different job within architectural culture. For example, The Political Economist is a writer that would address issues of money or finance in relationship to design or architecture. That was invented because we didn't think at the time there were many people writing about market culture in architecture. That was sort of a taboo topic. Other characters like the opinionator, for example, top row, is really profiled as a critic who takes a very specific point of view, is 2 parts optimist and 1 part indignant, has issues with authority, we write there, impatient. So we were also looking for a very pointed piece of writing. And that was also because we didn't see a lot of very opinionated criticism taking place, in the 2010s, for example, whereas it had been very common much earlier in architectural culture. So we wanted to sort of revive that. So the characters were conceived to address certain, I guess, problems or deficiencies maybe in criticism at large, but they were also invented to help writers maybe learn or maybe think about things in a different way or feel liberated to write not as themselves. So it was also conceived as something fun to do. The character has a subject matter, a kind of framed subject matter. It's quite open. And at the same time, they're prescribed with a voice and a word length. So you look at the genealogist, top row, we write in italicized font at the bottom, a speculative history of an overlooked design artifact in 2,500 words. So each character is also given a job description in terms of word length, tone, as well as attitude and sometimes subject matter. Some of them are also, the voice is prescribed in terms of whether it's first person, second person, etc. So you, which is bottom right here, is always a piece of writing that is written in second person. You go in here, you do this, you see this, you think about this. It's always the you, it's never the I. And we see that, for example, as a travelogue of an architectural interior in 1,800 words. The way this plays out in the magazine is that no author's name appears next to one's essay. So, for example, in issue 1, here you can see an essay that's actually written by Pierpaolo Tamburelli. It's a letter to Renato Rizzi, an Italian architect, about his project here, the Shakespeare Theatre in Poland. And this is, the genre of the essay is a letter. But again, you don't know who's writing it. You just know it's by the challenger, and you see the essay title here. This character is always writing to a living architect about one of their projects. The genealogist, seen on this spread, as I mentioned earlier, is invited to write about a specific object. This was a trophy that the author Jane Kelly found in the Canadian Centre of Architecture's archive, and it was a trophy given by Domino's Pizza to architects. And so she wrote about this particular object and the implication of giving architects prizes. Another character is it's a 2-part character. It's the odd couple. It's where we invite an historian and a designer to be paired up to discuss a series of photographs. This is Paul Anderson, who you may know, and Bob Brugman, a historian based in Chicago. who discussed these houses and the design of the facades, which do very strange details. If you look at the photograph in the top right, for example, you see strange shutters stuck to the side of doors and things like that. So this was a piece about American vernacular suburbia, and we were discussing the design of these houses. Or, you know, on the left-hand side, you see triple gable. How did that happen? Very funny the way they talk about it. Now, what we also try and do is give each character a graphic identity so that we can carry the character from issue to issue. So this one thing I didn't say yet, every character reoccurs in the next issue, although we are thinking of swapping some out. This is a spread from The Muckraker, and essay by Ellen Grimes, who is looking at the Chicago Building Code. And what we try to do with The Muckraker, for example, since it's really often about numbers and quantities and sort of evidence-based, we try to give it a scientific aesthetic with the graphs and the illustrations so that aesthetic continues across issues. So one of the challenges of doing this, I've already was sort of discussing this with Anna and Manuel, is that when we edit the magazine, it's not that we're only editing for content, we also have to edit for voice to make sure that each character is continuous across issues, a bit like a character in a television show played by different actors. There has to be some continuity. Another character is a graphic essayist. This is purely an essay that takes place through images. These are drawings by Anna Jaworska, her column series. So this ties into the visual idea that we also wanted in the magazine to have blocks of intense visual content to sort of break up the copy and the writing, so that the magazine also had a density of image to word or intense moments. There's almost like a portfolio of images inside it, because we care very much about the way the magazine looks and that it's a designed object. So these are often 8 to 10 pages of just images which are working in a narrative, some kind of narrative. You know, and then in terms of what this enables, it does enable very diverse content to be put in close proximity to each other. Another reason why we chose the fictitious characters was because we didn't want to organize the magazine through themes. We think that doesn't always work. You often have, I've done themed issues before, and often you have a lot of very good material that hangs together, but then there's always needs to be more stuff, and it's very hard to get that consistent within a themed issue. So we decided that the continuity would be the character, and then that would liberate us to be very eclectic with the kind of architectural material that we included in the magazine. So here you're looking at the political economist from Flat Out One, which was an analysis of the two Republican and Democratic national convention stage sets, 2008 and 2012. So we always keep design in the center, but then the way in which we look at design can be from very different kinds of perspectives, and the fictional characters allow us to do that. So as I mentioned earlier, different illustrators illustrate the characters for us. So the first was by Cody Hudson that I showed. In our second issue, we invited Tom Bucktel, who is an illustrator also based in Chicago, who does actually illustrations for the New Yorker. You can see his images here depicting the characters. the way this works is we give the casting call to the illustrators. They then come up with ideas and interpretations, and we get sheets like this. And then sometimes they will tell us who the characters are. Other times they say, you decide. But then these get distributed on the cover of the magazine in the casting call, and as you've already seen, at the head of each essay. I love this photograph. We had to wait a little bit for Tom's illustrations because he was doing the caricatures of politicians around the time of an election. And so he had on his desk the flat out characters and the politicians on the same page, on the same space, which is just a very good coincidence. But here you can see the characters here appearing on flat out too. So they're also providing us with the cover material. And then again, as I mentioned, you can see here in the ground game political economist how that illustration then reappears, and in a way is a substitute for a name. James Goggin commissions all of the illustrators, and he often tries to find illustrators that don't typically do people, although in Tom Buchtel's case, that was an exception. So also the illustrator is in a way invited to play a role by drawing something that they don't normally draw. I'll get to that a little bit more in a moment. So you might be wondering, why are we doing this? So in terms of authorship, there is quite a history of critics in architectural culture writing under pseudonyms. For example, Nicholas Pevsner wrote under the pseudonym Peter F.R. Donner for Architectural Review in the 1940s, but he's writing as himself with just a different name. One of the inspirations for us was David Bowie and his alter egos of Ziggy Stardust, where I read that Bowie had invented these different personas because he found it very difficult to write songs. And when he got into character, he found it very easy to write songs. So when we were talking about this, we thought maybe it would be liberating for some writers to not be themselves. In other words, that they could produce different forms of writing and not find it so hard. Many writers I know, and certainly I can include myself in this category, find writing incredibly difficult. And sometimes it is just easier not to be yourself when you do that work. And then Manuel mentioned in an earlier discussion the work of the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa, who I was not familiar with, but have now learned more about. And I found this a really interesting and clarifying example for what we're doing at Flat Out. Pessoa invented a number of different fictitious authors, which he then inhabited himself and wrote under. He described these as heteronyms, and he gave this very helpful description of what that was. He said a pseudonymous works are by the author and his own person, except in the name he signs, whereas a heteronymous work is by the author outside his own person. They proceed from a full-fledged individual created by him, like the lines spoken by a character in a drama he might write. When I read this, I realized that Flat Out is between these two definitions. And so on the one hand, yes, we have some pseudonym type characters, for example, the Challenger, where it's an architect writing to another architect. They're writing as themselves, but under a pseudonym. We don't have the author yet writing in the voice of all the characters, although I think that would be a very interesting idea to do an issue where it's authored by one person and then as all their characters. So that's something we have to kind of think more about, but very helpful. I'm grateful to have been introduced to this. Now, in addition to the inhabiting the role, I've been looking a lot about looking into how authorship has been thought about or constructed in architectural culture, but also in popular culture. And another source that was inspiring was Andy Warhol's Interview magazine, where he interviewed celebrities, but didn't edit anything they said and published it, and then put their faces on the cover of the issue. So we see some of this tendency starting to appear actually in architectural examples, like Domus, which I'll get to in a moment. I was also interested in the way in which Hans Hollein, for example, in his exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt in New York in 1976, included the face as a vehicle to rethink design, not from the perspective of the functional object or the modernist object, but in terms of the non-designer or the individual, so that the face had served as this entry point into rethinking design from the center of the non-designer. Just after Hollein had done that, Alessandro Mendini was the editor for Domus magazine. And between 1980 and 81, he put faces of architects on the cover of this set of issues. It's important to understand that he was putting the cover, the photographs of the architects or artists, critics on the cover at a moment when we didn't have the term starchitect or the architectural celebrity. And many of these architects weren't at the height of their career. They were up and coming architects like Frank Gehry, for example. And he puts them on the front of the cover at a moment of obviously historicist postmodernism, but a moment when architectural culture is fracturing, it's splintering, there are calls for eclecticism, and the face becomes the way to say, we may all have different perspectives on what architectural culture is, but every individual here has an ideology, and that's what connects everybody together. And I thought this is really fascinating to me, the idea that you could cut across all that difference and distill something that was common, and that the face or the author was this connective tissue. The other very clever thing about these covers, which were designed by Sotsas, is the way in which the names of the architects is in the smallest font. If you look at Frank Gehry, which is, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but you can?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very, very tiny. And so this is also an inversion of what the fashion magazine would do, where they would put the name of the person very large. It would be the thing that you see, the name and then the face. Here there's a sort of inversion, and the role of the face is to stand in for something that's common. Mendini would then go on and redo this again in 2010 and 2011, but this time the face is a caricature, the architecture's face. He does this for just a short stint again at a moment that he mentions in an editorial, that where to think about authors and personalities is totally passé. It's over. And so I also thought it was interesting that he resurrected it, but reinvented it at a moment when a lot of critics were dismissing the role of authorship. So why is authorship dismissed? Well, here's a spread from Blueprint in 1987, where we see the designer being labeled as a superstar. And so I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but in the mid-90s, well, this is 87, but by the mid-90s, there's a lot of criticism about thinking about the architect in this way, or classifying the architect as a superstar. Now, what I think is pretty ironic about that is that in the 1970s, the architect is being described as a superstar. This is on the left, Arthur Erickson, the Canadian architect, described as one in Time magazine in 72, and then Andrea Branzi on the right in Casabella, in calling Louis Kahn a superstar in an obituary. Why 72? I think it has something to do with this, which is the launch of the film after Andrew Lloyd Webber's play Jesus Christ Superstar. So there's also this interesting and unlikely crossover, I think, between a critical architecture magazine like Casabella and then popular culture. And so also in Flat Out, we wanted to experiment with how could we have both dimensions in the same magazine. It wasn't a magazine that was exclusively academic or scholarly, but it also wasn't exclusively populist. Could we have populist and scholarly content together in the same issue? So those are some of the influences or inspirations for why we decided to frame or organize the magazine through the fictitious authors. Now, what you can also see here on the cover of Flat Out 4, our last issue, is that even though we have personas, some of the illustrators don't illustrate them as personas. So here we have them as objects. In other issues, we had them as fruit. So they've also been completely open to interpretation. And I think also the moment that they're an object is interesting, given the recent discussions of object-oriented ontology, where even the object is somehow personified. In terms of how we structure the magazine, like the design of it, this is a contents page. So when you open it up, you will see all of the characters on the first page announced, the title of the essay, and the beginning of each essay, which is then continued on the next page. We wanted to do that to give a very quick overview of all the content, to juxtapose all of the content, and to see if we could achieve the effect like the front page of a newspaper, where you see all of the headlines and then you jump to the content later in other pages. So we thought that would be super accessible. A lot of people found it confusing or annoying and obnoxious because it didn't tell you who was writing, and you had to jump around. After you finish the issue, one essay, you then have to jump back to the contents to read the beginning of the next essay. So if you go from the content, if we look at the graphic essayist, it says continued on page 16, and then the copy continues, and then the essay proceeds. We only suspend the authorship. We do reveal who is writing at the back of the issue, and here is the curtains, what we call curtains, as in, when they're closing at the end of a show. And then the cast is revealed at the back. So if you did want to know who's writing in the magazine, you would go to the back first, and then you could go to the front. The other thing is all of the essays are kind of just organized as columns, like columns in a newspaper. The structure of the page is always columns, which enabled us to juxtapose different things together. In terms of criticism and what we were aiming for, another strong source for me, at least, was Arts and Architecture magazine, which was edited by John and Tenzer. It was based in Los Angeles, incredibly beautiful magazine. And Tenzer, I think, edited it from the mid-40s to the maybe late 50s or early 60s. And it was a magazine that primarily dealt with art, sculpture, painting, and architecture. They're quite thin. They always had gorgeous covers. And then they had very interesting little pieces of writing on criticism. And here's one on the right-hand side, A Pocket Guide to Architectural Criticism, which is a very funny essay which diagnoses all the different kinds of critics that are writing at that time and gives them very funny makes up names like Accolades to Genius Criticism or Our Way of Life Criticism. So they're classifications of different sorts of criticism, they're critiques, and they call people out, and we wanted, and it's beautifully written and very concise and short. And so we were hoping to achieve that kind of writing in the magazine as well. And we try and do that, although it's hard to do it in long form pieces, we've realized. One thing we did do to try and get that sort of short form criticism issue, it happened in Flat Out 3, where we decided that the Adman character, and you can, where my cursor is here at the top of the cast, we decided to make that a collective character. Now, the Adman is, at first we imagined it just writing short little ads for things, and then we realized that ads were always, in a way, forms of reviews of products or reviews of shows, so trailers. So we thought, what would it mean to have a character that was actually many people, many voices, all writing very short reviews? So in Flat Out 3, we experimented with our reviews of the Chicago Architecture Biennial and wanted to extend the review genre beyond simply, you say, books or films to include installations. You can just see little entries here describing the overall Biennale, specific entries like 5 Rooms by Paul or Paul. That was my timer, I'm almost done. Publications, but also symposia. There were a lot of events. I mean, right now with a lot of biennales and triennales, there are often lots of events and they're often not reviewed. So we also wanted to find a way to start to review those. Now, we're in print, they're always late. That's another thing maybe we'll get to in the discussion, this idea of what is the role of print magazine today. We only do print. And one of the things that it can do is that it doesn't have to deliver news anymore and it doesn't have to be current, but it can offer space for more in-depth reflection. We've got a couple more things on criticism. I think also we want to, and we try to think about how can visual material be criticism. This is a spread from Julia McMorrow's cartoon series on the history of exhibitions. And she drew a series of exhibitions the 20th century into the 21st century, and then ran them all together as a narrative in a timeline, chronological, and then used speech bubbles to produce comments on the exhibitions and also across exhibitions. So this is another example where we're really trying to think through what are other kinds of or modes of criticism that are possible that exceeds simply writing. I think also Jennifer Bonner's renderings, which we published in Flat Out 4 that you're looking here at the screen, also for me, I'm not sure if Jennifer would see it the same way, are a form of criticism, but this is a criticism of the role of renderings or how they're produced and what can they do. And I'm always struck when I look at particularly the print version of her work, the depth of the image in terms of shadow and color and grain that is less evident in the digital. So that's something else that we've been very interested in exploring. And then just to quickly wrap up, obviously the conversation is another way to produce reflection on artifacts or other aspects of architectural culture. This is a discussion between Andrew Zago and Sean Brisky, an artist, on things made of wood, artifacts that Brisky makes out of wood. It's called Wood or Not Wood. Some of the things are wood, some of the things look like wood, but they're concrete. And so again, there's this sort of close relationship between the image and the conversation. And finally, one of the characters is a cameo, and where we invite somebody just to make an appearance in the magazine, and we were short on a cameo, or somebody dropped out. I can't remember what happened in Flat Out 4. So we quickly had to fill it. And then this was something I wrote, where I was interested in writing from the perspective of a potted plant, because I saw so many plants appearing in images. For example, here, Fala Atelier, the image top right, you see a house interior with a lot of plants put into it. And a lot of the contemporary architecture right now is just kind of full of plants. And I wanted to think about why that is the case, and then thought, what happened if I wrote as a plant? And that's what I tried to do. And it was quite liberating, sort of weird, but fun. So, another example of not being yourself, but not even being another person, being an object. Last thing, now I am finished. In terms of where we want to go, one thing we try to do in all the essays is not only keep design at the center, but also think about the future. And what I find really interesting today is that many people use this word future, and I did a quick test in the Avery Architectural Periodicals Index, how often this word future appeared in titles, and you can see that it exponentially takes off in the 1970s to 80s. I think this is largely coinciding with the discovery of the ozone hole. But in any case, the term exponentially takes off, but at the same time, it means a smaller and smaller thing, which is the future is no longer very far away, but it's very, very close. So it means something completely different. So, and in that context, we're also trying to think about what the future means today, and how could we actually kind of reconstruct this idea of the future in the magazine. So that's where I'd like to end it. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing. Is that what I do now, Anna?
Yeah, I think if you, that's
okay.
That's cool. That was great. Yeah, well, you leave it in the future tense. Nice. Yeah. Actually, this was great to see across all the magazines. Thank you for this. I was thinking that, I don't know if you would agree, but that there is this 16th character, which is the editor, which is a collective, like the Atman somehow, right? You're several. And I feel like this thing about the future is raised up in one of your editorials. Actually, the third, on issue 3, is when you raise the topic of the future explicitly. And I was wondering about this character of many people that when we were speaking the other day, you said that it's on themselves. You are like contrarians, and the way you edit, it is fueled by a sort of constant kind of looking at the material in a very kind of I don't know, like blunt way, and like you look at what you receive in a certain way and that you return a lot of comments, right? Like you enter in a dialogue with these characters. You're casting them, and then you enter in a dialogue. And there is something about that condition that also opens up a time span that you explicitly also say in your first issue, that you're going to take your time. You're going to take the time to do it. And so I think it's very present, no? That it's something that it's really important for you guys, that to say that there is something in the making that is a span of time, but also how you relate with time and the contemporaneity of the magazine in those terms. Like it is deeply contemporaneous, and again, it's like contextualizing back and forth. So, I mean, in this context, this idea of future comes timely with the Biennale, right, in Chicago, or at least that's somehow my reading. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know how you think. Was this influenced somehow by this that moment, and how would you say it goes back and forth, like your interest, for instance, in defining future in these terms with certain things that are happening around you, or you think that what you pose on the editorial questions is more like timeless, it's more like, you know, like something that you're interested in as whole? How much are you influenced, and you influence the context, and how do you see that bouncing off? You know what I mean? Maybe it's a bit of a complex question, but I had a lot of things going on in my head while you were presenting.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I think definitely we are responding to the context. So how to answer this? Well, I mean, maybe the part about the future is wondering where did it go? I mean, a lot of work seems to be, is often about the present, what's here and now, or like the future, which is tomorrow, as in 24 hours. And at the beginning of the 20th century, let's say in architectural culture, the future was a long way away. I mean, if you think of modernism, or that one could have an idea and then it could be executed in 100 years or something like that. Now, there's good and bad things about that. So, but it's very hard to think long-term today, like just for so many reasons. And also, I think the future has gone from being an optimistic place where technology can solve all our problems to a place that is probably, because of environmental disasters and global warming, is likely to be worse than where we are today. So, like our attitude towards the future is totally different today. And so, and a lot of it's very bleak. So, we also try to be optimistic. I'm not saying, we have to look, 100 years away and we're going to do all of this, but we also need to be a little optimistic and also not merely solving problems, but also thinking about how to form a problem or pose a problem. So that's one of the things that I think we're trying to do in the magazine. So we do often ask authors, well, what are the implications of this for design tomorrow? Or, what do you imagine could be a better trajectory? So that's part of it. And then another part of it maybe is, what is the role of criticism, or what's the point of it? I think it has to be more than simply, endorsing work. There needs to be some interpretation and critique and direction. Like, what should we be, if this isn't working, or what should we be doing? Or if it is working, why is it working? And should we do more of it? I think that yes, I don't know, that's sort of our attitude towards time. I don't know if that's answered the question.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was more like registering all the kind of time related conditions that are embedded. Like, there's no one time, but I think now you're making me think, because somehow you're reframing, like when now you were describing what future means, but you also did the same somehow for authorship or for criticism, right? You were kind of okay, right? Like these things there are things that are interesting, and then you're looking at it from another point of view. And this idea of introducing a different point of view, I feel it's kind of the key, to the project.
I think so. I like the way you see it. I think we do try and reinvent things, or we don't accept the status quo. We try and work within it and reinvent it to do something else. I think that's also just a way of trying to intervene, not just comment, but put something out in the world, which is a magazine, like an designed object. So it's a form of, I see it also as a form of intervention.
Yeah. No, totally. No, also this intervention that now that you mentioned, you said this thing about the scholarly and the popular culture, right? And this wish of putting both together. And then I remember that also you mentioned the other day that the magazine is very quickly sold in a comic book, or no, I don't know if it's a comic store, but in a kind of illustrator based kind of right store in Chicago. And I was thinking that there is this vector that you're also inverting, the fact that architecture somehow only receives some kind of inputs and has to respond or kind of generate responses for this. But now that also that you are projecting towards the outside, and that architecture kind of influences back, or the thinking of architecture, in this case to the magazine, influences back to other disciplines. So I don't know, to me that is kind of, this is very interesting, because somehow we're always kind of reflecting on how we are influenced and we kind of absorb, and we're very kind of, let's say, correct in being able to absorb, but also how do we project outwards? Would that be something that you think it's part of the mission somehow of the magazine to invert that vector?
Yes, it is part of the mission. I think we have only narrowly achieved it. Like this book, this comic, or sort of, comics bookstore in Chicago, it does pretty well at, I think, largely because of the vision, because of the design and the illustrations and the visual component of the magazine. I think, maybe people don't read it because sometimes I think, oh, I wish we could still be broader yet. And in fact, we do have an outsider as a character who's somebody that doesn't know anything about architecture, but is somehow related, has had some brush with architecture, and they write about that. So we do try, you're right, we do try and open it up. I guess I hadn't thought about it, but it's totally obvious in retrospect that the illustrations could do that job, or the design and the graphic design could do that job for us better than the writing, actually, like so far. Mm-hmm. It's an ambition. It's hard to achieve it, although historically magazines like Arts and Architecture Apps, I think, really did achieve it. I think Domus does too. It's got a massive circulation, and it's also very broad.
No, that's true. No, that's I think it does. I mean, there is this thing about this sort of thermometer of the magazines, because when you were showing the Domus, and you were somehow saying that it put together by putting the faces of the architects and doing that, like generating a commonness on a kind of diverse kind of landscape. And somehow, I don't know how you say it, but it feels a little bit like we are in a sort of eclectic landscape again in terms of what happens in the discipline. And I mean, how much the characters are a thermometer of this culture. And I know that you have to edit the character every time for every, like, to build the continuity, but you also said that maybe there will be new characters appearing in the future. So I was wondering how you see that kind of like agenda of the magazine being a thermometer of this eclecticism, and how do you feel it manages, and how explicitly or non you kind of think of this landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, yes, it is a thermometer. At the same time, yes, so yes, it's sort of, I think you can see it as maybe symptomatic or a thermometer of the eclecticism. At the same time, I think what we're trying to do is to avoid specialization, if that makes sense. So, like, it's not all, it's not purely academic, or it's not purely journalistic, if that makes sense. So I think it's difficult, because the eclecticism today is an eclecticism of specialization, whereas I think maybe in the late 70s, early 80s moment, eclecticism was an intellectual project. Like, it was, from Charles Jenks to whoever, it was like, okay, let's diversify style or diversify modes of communication. So it was a way to sort of break down or get away from modernism, like the monolith modernism. So it was an intellectual project. I think today it's not the same project. It's not conscious.
Yeah.
It's sort of, and it's something that parallels almost market culture. It's all nichified. It's all geared towards audiences of one. I think that's a little bit where we are in architectural culture, that there are lots of kind of niche discourses and specializations that cater to, very small audiences. So we're trying not to do that. Now, it could be that, we're kind of multiplying the eclecticism. That could very well be the case.
No,
I don't know. I mean, it's a very interesting question and a very interesting observation. I have to give it more thought.
No, I think, I mean, I don't know. I have no clue. I thought, no, that the magazine was trying to generate a commonness, not more difference. Quite the opposite, more like detecting that there is a certain kind of variety of source, that it doesn't even have a form, as you say, because it's not an ideological thing, or it has no agenda. It just somehow happens. And then the magazine is not doing that. It's kind of putting together a sense of a collective, that it's this kind of voices. That's the way I was thinking about it. But yeah.
Yes. And yes. So I guess it constructs different kinds of collectives through the character. So if you think, but it doesn't do it immediately. It's going to do it in time across issues. So at a certain moment, there'll be 10 political economists, or there'll be 10 outsiders. And that is a collective, or, of people brought together through that character. Mm-hmm. One thing I didn't describe, but next to the casting call on the last page, you may have seen the page with all of the sort of exploding speech bubbles and with the quotes from each character. We put that in because we did see it as sort of a group of people having a conversation, even though obviously they cross telephone wires. But we did imagine that this was a group of, some kind of group that are discussing things together. So that is implicit. But yes, I think over time we are building collectives within the issue, and collective criticism when multiple authors write under one character.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there is also this emergent thing, that from one number, the same character, if I'm not wrong, speaks to himself in the following issue, but it's a different person, right?
Yes.
Has this happened? How many? Like 2 times? Like
it's happened twice so far. Yes, that was very surprising. So we didn't expect that, but that was. Then we saw the potential where one could, self-reflect on something the character had written, even though it was authored by somebody else. So that was a great, wonderful insight, actually, to see what the potential of the structure was.
Yes. No, that's super interesting. I mean, I think it goes back to this kind of time condition all the time, no? Because now I was thinking of the characters. I had like a silly question, like, do they mature or something? Like, because when you showed the domus, they were the guys, they were young, and then the second one, they were like, I don't know, Peter Cook looked like already pretty old. So do you think they will mature in some way, or are they timelessly, I don't know?
That's a great question. I've never thought about that. They're always, they're timeless so far. That is a really great question. That would be really great if they were getting older, wouldn't it? I mean,
maybe
not like that, but I like that idea. Okay, I'm going to write that one down. We'll discuss that as a board.
Cool.
Not yet.
As of now, they are the same. They are in this kind of unknown age. No, they can be 30, 40, but you don't know how old.
You don't know. That's also what I was saying. Realized when I was reading reading up on Pessoa, that his characters were so fully fleshed out in so many ways, whereas ours are skeletal. So there's definitely room for us to fill them out in further issues.
Yeah, well, you define many things because you define, as you were saying, the genre and then how many words and right. And if you speak in first, second person. And when you receive the pieces, I was curious to know like how you receive them and people are following these protocols, let's say, in general. What do you face in that moment? Because it's not only about filling that protocol, because it's a problem of tone, right? It's a kind of getting into sync with a certain tone. How do you say, I don't know, more cranky, more funnier? I don't know. What is the kind of feedback that you write to the people that cast?
Oh, it can vary, and there are different approaches. So, you know, maybe to give an example, like the you character, which is always written in second person, you are this, you are that. First of all, it can't be I. So the person has to be, the you has to be embedded in the piece. And then, you know, one of the things we started to encourage were sort of almost like speech bubble or thought bubbles inside the text. So how do you know, someone's walking through a space, but then how are you thinking about things on the side? Are you thinking about what you're eating for dinner or something like that? So sometimes you might say, okay, add in something personal but external to this. So that would be one technique, for example. Another one would be, you know, if we need it to be more opinionated, we can do things like break up sentences so they're shorter, seem more kind of urgent. Then we also say, well, you know, we'll put in line copy edits. That's a really interesting point, but can you be more opinionated about that, or can you be more forceful about the way you say it? So it could be about adding extra adjectives or words in to do it. So there are different ways, but yes, usually it'll be comments asking for specific things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, this thing about being opinionated, and that I think it's kind of general, no? Like all the characters are somehow opinionated, like they're posing something maybe in different ways, like you were saying with a plant, no? Like you make an observation of, and then you put yourself in that position, or this idea, to me, it's very interesting in terms of the discipline today, like the and the sort of liberation of being like showing proof. I mean, of course, the texts are scholarly in a way. In terms, I mean, they elaborate something, and actually they can elaborate almost anything that you can grab, because it's interesting the moment you look at it. But also, they are not pretending to be like scientific. So there is something.
Right.
Right, that's going in another direction, and to steer the culture into that direction, it is a very bold move, right? Because and I think and I'm going to the direction of the print condition that you were saying before, because you are in your first editorial, you say, okay, there's Twitter already, there is all these places where you can cross-check facts and data and information, and you can know if this is right or wrong or whatever. But when you go to print, then you acquire this condition where this is not necessary, because this is being checked in this kind of fast track. So then, I don't know, is this part of it? Is the fact that being opinionated again, it's on print, because all the sort of scientific load and kind of fact and cross-checking is happening in another velocity, so you are free from that? That would make sense?
Yes, I mean, I guess we were trying to bring in fiction, and because you're absolutely right, there's so much obligation for evidence and you know, academic protocols. And you know, it's not that we don't dismiss that entirely. You know, like The Genealogist, for example, is a very scholarly essay with a lot of footnotes, and so it has that. But we wanted also for the magazine just to be pleasurable to read and enjoyable to look at and touch. And so, yes, I mean, these things also, for those that love magazines and print. I mean, this magazine hopefully is for you, but I think these are important dimensions. We're in design, so we're in a design culture, and I think that the weight and appearance and of the object matter. So yes, so in response to the evidence, what you're calling evidence, or did you say that, or did I say? Anyway, yes, we were going against that. We wanted to bring in fiction. And then in relation to the time and print, architectural magazines used to be monthly, like Domus, Blueprint, Casabella, and their job was to bring news. This is pre-internet, pre-social media. They were the medium of what was going on at that moment. And a magazine is now, it's possible to reinvent the magazine. I mean, in a way, it's wonderful for the magazine. It can be reinvented and it doesn't have to do that job anymore. And because of that, it can be very, very slow. And we are very slow. We aim for twice a year. I don't think we've made it yet. But it's okay because well, maybe it's not okay, but I think I said at the end of the first editorial, we take our time as fast as we can.
Yes, that was clear. So we know it's going to happen. And it's funny that in the last one you're asking, are you still here? No, like, you guys there?
Yeah, that was because of COVID, and we were very late in getting the magazine out the door, so we weren't so sure who was still reading with us.
Yeah, no, that maybe like going into the direction of the new number, or as much as you can reveal about the new number. There was something that I was seeing across, like, and I don't know if this is something that builds up or not, because I mean, in the first number you set up the principles, and there are I don't know, a number of them, and they are very clear, and they are very kind of I don't know, like shocking in a good way. Like you're like, oh, like mobilizing, like you get mobilized and you're like, okay, this is fantastic. Then in the second one, you're like being super blunt in terms of sharing what it means for you guys to do this. Like, this is super hard work. We're editing this, we're doing this, and you get related to your project because you feel like, okay, so yeah, it's true. Like, this is crazy. This is a lot of editorial work. You know what I mean? Like, and you get like, I don't know, like empathetic, is it right? Like empathy towards what you're doing. And then in the where are we going, you introduce the problem of time and the number of points of view. And in the fourth issue, there are topics that are shared about in between the characters, right? And you mentioned some of them, wellness, but also like digital tools. And so there are like topics that start clustering. So in a way, I don't know, maybe it's a reading, of course, the simplistic reading of an evolution. What is this fifth issue tackling? Maybe as a continuation to this kind of developing in a certain way, or not, or where is your mind at, your collective mind at for this fifth issue? What is the question, let's say? Because I imagine the editorial is going to be a question. It's been 4 questions.
There are always questions. There are always questions.
Yeah.
Yes, that is. I usually write the editorial right at the end when I have everything in and I have an overview of what it's about. And I haven't written it yet, and I'm still thinking it through. But I want to deal with this issue of access. Like just how you get work out in the world. I think that's what I want to sort of think through. I mean, often these editorials are, yes, you're right. The first 2 were confessions. Here's what we've done. And then the second one is, why did we do this again? And then after that, I thought, no, we can't simply be like navel gazing in every editorial. It's ridiculous. So we have to be more, we have to sort of lay out a topic. So that's where we're going now. Now, five, yes, it's access. Like how do we, what is this issue of audience today? And I think for criticism or for architecture even, I think that's the issue I want to deal with. And part of that's to do with the fact that I had read Chris Anderson's book called The Long Tail. I don't know if you've read it. It's a former editor of Wired, I think. I hope I got that right. But he wrote a book about like how music hits when they first come out, what makes a hit, and then all of the music that comes out afterwards has smaller and smaller audiences. So there's a famous graph that shows, kind of something peaking very close to its release, and then a long, long tail where the graph goes off like that. And people are all producing music, but the audiences are diminishing. And his argument is that all these tiny little audiences in the end add up to maybe more than the big hits, which is why platforms like Amazon have made so much money from, selling other people's little tiny things. So that was sort of interesting to me to also think, well, actually, in architecture culture, it maybe it's not about a massive circulation of content anymore. I mean, maybe we're just thinking about audience and accessing completely the wrong way. So I haven't figured it out yet, but that's, I think, a topic I want to think through. And maybe it is partly autobiographical in terms of the magazine, in the sense that we are, after 5 issues, going to start thinking about how to transition to online content as well. And we need a concept for that, and how do we do that without undermining the print or the artifact. So I think that's sort of the latest issue that I'm thinking about, but I'm thinking out loud right now. My thoughts aren't together, and that's less to do with what's actually in the magazine than it is less about the content than it is about the future, maybe. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, Anna. I mean,
yeah, it is super amazing. I mean, I didn't know about this curve that you mentioned, but it makes a lot of sense, and it's crazy that we don't think about it in these terms. It's true, like, right? And also this transition that you mentioned to online. But you said that you are going to keep printing all the same. So you're going to
always going to print. And then it would be that there would, one of the issues is, how do you make your content searchable?
Yes.
Yeah. And get it into databases. So that's just, that's a duty. That's something we owe all of our authors, that all of their content is searchable. So that's one of the reasons, the main reason why we want to do it, to get it searchable. I mean, I'm just thinking, now I'm thinking out loud again about this idea of audience and access, when, so much of the information that comes out about biennials and triennials is quantitative. 500,000 visitors yesterday, or so many participants. Like, everything is about the numbers and how big the numbers are. In a counterintuitive way, what if the numbers don't matter? Like, what if it's not about that? So that's something I'd like to write about.
It's super interesting. No, it's super. Well, I really like it. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But yeah, it's
probably not a good business model.
Probably not.
But disastrous. And we're a 501c3, which means like a non-for-profit organization. So we're registered as a business, but we're not for profit. So we will definitely be not for profit.
By
with
definition.
That business model.
Well, let's call Manuel. I'm sure Manuel will be dying for questions, and I would continue forever, but
okay. I for sure I have many questions, and the presentation and the conversation has been amazing, full of ideas. I had one small question actually that I think it relates with something that Anna asked before, the evolution of the characters. The question would be if you incorporate features to the characters, features that were not
Features?
features, yeah, like that were not that you could not foresee before the certain author or certain person wrote using that character. Because I assume that it might vary a lot depending on who writes.
Yes.
Like the persona permeates even with the restrictions. And yeah, I was wondering if you incorporate features, like I'm guessing you understand more and more what the character is about along the.
Could you give an example of what when you say feature, what are you thinking of?
For instance, somebody writes, as you mentioned, and in the cameo, you're writing as a plant. So cameo has a new feature that it's the capacity of being non-human and to animate objects that have no voice, or somebody writes in the ad man and he shouts all the time using exclamation marks, so it becomes yelling becomes a part of the character, and, or certain specific way of yelling, or I don't know, maybe Dear Renato was a bit grim compared to other ones, you know, and so
yes, I see what you're saying. You know, that's a great question, because our tendency, and maybe this is something we should not be doing. Our tendency is to try and edit for consistency across. So we would tend, if someone came with loads of exclamation marks and yelling, I think we would edit that out. Now, why would we do that? That's because I guess we have a really fixed idea of the character. But what both you and Anna have suggested is, you know, that the character could grow or could develop over time, which I think is a really amazing idea. And so we just haven't thought about that. So I guess the honest answer is not yet. But what I can add is it's a really fine balance between the essay being all style and character versus content. And sometimes what will happen is someone will totally get into the character, like amazing, but then that is the essay, you know, and haven't quite dealt with the parameters of the content or the subject matter. So then we have to sort of ask to scale, you know, we have to shift that balance a bit. Or other times people would, you know, some of us are more reserved about getting into character, but deliver all the content. So, you know, we're always negotiating those two ends. But this idea of the characters maturing, it's a wonderful idea. I just never thought of that. Thank you. So features, about features.
I think it's great that I think Anna was talking, you both were talking about this, that you edit, I don't know if you call it, if it's okay to say this, like hardcore editing, like really balancing. I think that is great, because then you're left with maybe irreducible features, you know, like those that you can't eliminate even if you want to. Yeah, I guess.
Because then it's not like a mood that it has. Like, because when you were saying it's too grim, it's more like like one day that you are feeling grim, but it's not that. I mean, I think there's a fine line between the character becoming moody or actually developing some sort of, I don't know, stronger personality but so, I don't know. I think it's a delicate kind of area, no?
And with regard to the editing, many of us will do passes at the same essay. So Jane Kelly is a phenomenal copy editor, also does some content editing with Sarah Ahmed. So often, there will be different hands in the essay looking for different things. There's content, or, I tend to look for overall argument, punchlines, is this focused on design? Is, like always, what's important is always about architecture. No matter what angle or design, no matter what angle you're looking at it from, that has to be central to the piece, because also we want this to be an architectural design magazine, not somehow with that content being peripheral. Others might look for the historical specificity. Jane is masterful at English. So and Ellen is incredibly witty, and so like different hands touch different pieces at different moments. That maybe that also helps sort of produce some consistency as well.
Yeah, I have a question on my phone. Actually, it's Joanna, because people reach out in different ways. Joanna Potap, she's a graduate from the school and also teaching. Let me see, because it's not formulated, but it's half comment. But I think it relates to what you were just saying in terms of the content being not by being sort of new content or a new point of view on a content. You're somehow you don't have to convince or persuade, but instead, it's the opposite, sorry. You have to convince or persuade, but you don't have to inform. It's not a matter of informing. So I don't know, I believe that she's interested in knowing how the content is kind of curated in terms of being something in terms of persuasion, that then by being so, it doesn't need to be informative. So how do you manage, let's say, it's difficult. I'm trying to build it as a question because it's like a long paragraph, but I understand that it's like saying how content can become persuasive instead of informative.
Yes, well, yes. So we try and make sure every essay has an argument. It's not just a kind of recitation of facts, for example. So yes, and that requires interpretation or taking a position or a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we definitely try and nudge and coax writers to put forward a point of view, which is sometimes it means adding a sentence at the end of a paragraph that then sort of says, and this all means this, or this supports this. So sometimes it's, you can convert things by the way you begin and end a paragraph. I don't know if that answers the question. I hope it does.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And it made me think one short thing. And I mean, because one says you're based in Chicago, right? And I think I asked you this before, but it was more in between the three of us. How do you think it's part of it, like part of the project? I mean, I know people from all over, right, in Flat Out, so it's not that, but there is something cooking, and I know there's a culture that somehow produces this, right? And if you can say a little bit about that, or how, or even how it has evolved from 2016, because now I believe things have changed, or how much do you still kind of feel connected to that tissue, which I think it was pretty dry, as I understand at the beginning, to kind of generate a culture around. And yeah, so.
Yes, I mean, I think it is definitely embedded in a way of thinking about design and architecture at UIC where I work. I mean, many of us on the board flat out board are either alumni or working at UIC. So there's that environment which has probably, by osmosis filtered in. But, there's also, I mean, a lot of our content comes from here too, because of the biennials, the biennials now, and various other events going on. I mean, there are a lot of things and a lot of institutions doing things in Chicago right now. So it's sort of irresistible not to engage it.
Yes.
So, yes, I mean, it's part of it, but at the same time, I also think because we are a contrarian group, we keep it at arm's length and are also skeptical. We don't endorse everything, and we're skeptical of some things, and we try and find a way to express that skepticism in the magazine. So we're proximate, but try and keep our distance at the same time, and not merely celebrate everything that's going on.
Definitely, yeah. Well, you get into trouble, no? Like you like to get into trouble also about what you're saying.
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes.
In the right measure.
Yes, sometimes we do. But, that's the role of criticism. I mean, I also think that, which is also odd, is that we're in a moment where there isn't very much confrontation or conflict in architectural culture. There is in politics, especially in the US, but less in in architectural culture. And that's historically a very different and new situation. There was, great debates in the past. People wanted to disagree. Disagreement is not everybody's cup of tea today.
Yeah. Well, not only that, it's also kind of something that it's being avoided, no? And I mean the kind of political correctness sort of environment that goes in a completely different directions.
Yes, and this is also aided and abetted by the specialization and all the nichification that takes place. One can just, discuss or be celebrated in a very small group, and there's no need to engage with other groups.
Yes,
I think so. That's and it's exacerbated by the this kind of narrowing of discourses.
Yeah, totally. We had a question, but I think it was answered. There was a very long question by Luis Fernando, it's a student, but I think Luis Fer, if you agree, otherwise you can re-ask, but we've been asking across the different questions on that. I don't know if Manuel, you're receiving other inquiries. I want to leave room to.
Yeah, I'm receiving a question right now. So in a moment I can.
You see that now we read each other so much. It's so strange that we never read, because you have to elaborate this question, for instance, has to be elaborated. So it's something new, no, that is happening, because we would just speak our minds and be very messy. Okay, let's see if you get something there. I mean, of course I can a lot of things to say.
Yes, I have a question by Ciro Nagle, and his question is that he says that you mentioned earlier that some characters had a sort of activation policy behind them, or activation politics, and the question is if those cultural politics are tactics that operate locally as punctual activations, or if there are devices of a strategy that could be made explicit.
Well, could you repeat the question? What was the first part? It was about politics.
I'm sorry, but I'm translating. But that you mentioned earlier that certain characters had an activation, like a policy of activating, or the politics of activating certain cultural agendas that were forgotten, and you talked about this. I'm adding this myself, but you talked about a revival, or and so I think that the question is if that cultural policies or politics are tactics that operate locally as punctual or local activations, or if there are devices of a strategy that could be made explicit.
Mm-hmm. I think I think we see ourselves based locally, but trying to address issues, and Ciro, thank you for the question, by the way, but we're trying to address issues more broadly that exceed the context. So I'm not sure if I'm answering this right, but yes, we're reacting, and we're trying to identify areas that aren't being given much attention by inventing a character for it. But that invention is directed toward architectural discourse, not toward the local context. Have I answered that?
I think you are answering that. I maybe interpreting, but I expanded to maybe I don't think the idea of local maybe was in that sense, not in local in terms of localization, but as a kind of punctual operation, like, okay, the market culture, we revive that, or the critical, the opinionated person, we bring it back, we embrace this as something that is a one-off, or if there is a strategy that can be, I mean, maybe not in real time, but laid out now, maybe you lay out that, then to say, no, this is part of a broader, you know what I mean? I think he meant local as in one-off, not as in
singular.
Yeah, as singular. So maybe I don't know if
no, this is repeated. So the character's job is to keep hitting that point across issues. So if it's about dealing with the political economy, it's dealing with this sort of intersection of design with market culture or political economy, that's their job every time in the issue, even though the subject matter could be different. So it's it's a serial, it's like hitting the nail on the head in every issue. That's how I've imagined it so far. To build up a density of material on that topic so that we could then, look up the 10 issues and say, oh, well, how were people looking at that, money and design across this 5-year period or 7-year period?
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned that maybe you were even evaluating the possibility of publishing one character, no?
Yes.
As a one book.
Yes.
That would make that kind of project. Yeah. That's super. Yeah, I think.
yes, the author, but then the fictitious author, but then 10 writers around that topic. I mean, in a strange way, it would be a themed book through the character if it's on one, topic.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think we can go on and keep asking you things, but also, thank you so much, Penelope. This has been really super fantastic and enjoyable. And maybe Manuel, if you're okay with it, we can wrap up, but I wanted to really deeply thank you for this.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It was fun. And I have new ideas after this conversation, so, which is always good. And a pleasure to meet both of you.
Okay, thank you, Penelope, for your generous presentation and conversation, and thank you, Anna, as well. I think it's been great, and hope to see you soon. And okay, till next time.
In person.
Yes, please.
Yes, in person.
Well, stay
Okay.
well.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.